Hey guys, what's up? I came across a fairly interesting video today by Pixelated Apollo, whom I appreciate raised an issue that's quite interesting, I'd say. Apollo raised the question why Rome 2 is still $60 in the US, or in my store, the Norway store, it's 559.99 NOK, which is essentially $60 as well. The question is interesting because I think it touches upon a point which kind of cements what Rome 2 is in the Total War space, or at least in the Creative Assembly mind. The question is, of course, why Rome 2 remains $60 12 years after launch. It is an old game by now. Even though it got a sort of refresh with the Emperor edition, that edition does not include most of the DLC. In fact, it includes, a bunch of fixes, which is obviously should, but it does not include anything but the Imperator Augustus campaign pack in terms of campaign packs. And as you can see, there are a bunch of these campaign packs. Now you can buy the Ultimate Edition for about $80, I guess, which will cost you a lot less, 50% in fact, than buying the game itself and the packs outside of it. But that's not the issue here. The issue is why the main game costs $60. And I want to address some of Apollo's points here, because Apollo looks, I think, quite erroneously at things like Metacritic score. He asks why Shogun 2 costs way less than Rome 2 despite having a higher Metascore. If we look at the Steam score, Rome 2's is actually higher than Attila's, which Apollo also mentioned. Attila has a higher Metascore but a lower Steam score, yada yada yada. The point is, scores have never really mattered to game cost. But what I wanted to touch upon in this video is the idea of Rome 2. Rome 2 is a big game in the Total War pantheon. It might actually just be the biggest historical title there has ever been. In my opinion, the vastness of Rome 2 itself clearly defends its cost twice that of Shogun 2. Rome 2 is much larger. As a game itself, Rome 2 is still relevant somehow, either because of the workshop where mods are still being made en masse, whether through DEI or, other mods. We have a bunch of smaller mods where people are still, updating these visuals with amazing new tech, basically. Doing incredible things with Rome 2 that we haven't seen in the past, such as, and I'm gonna shout out, the MIS or Mice Tiny VFX mod, which does incredible things with the visuals of, fire and smoke effects, blood, snow, dirt, etc, etc. Rome 2 is still this massive thing that has a chokehold on the community in ways that Shogun 2 or anything else before it does not. 6,300 concurrent players in Rome 2, that's not bad actually for a 12-year-old game at this point. In comparison, Shogun 2 is only at 2,800. It kind of shows the difference in appeal and probably relevance for the games. Again, I think Apollo's raising of this pricing issue is a good thing. Games should be as affordable as they can be. And especially after all this time, it's a valid criticism to make of Rome 2's pricing. Could also say that, the game has been on sale a bunch of times. It's on sale maybe every other month or so. Hundreds of thousands of people have bought Rome 2. Most people that are interested in Total War or strategy games and who know that Rome 2 exists, they probably have this game at this moment. There is, however, something I think we should remember about Rome 2, because even though the pricing could be adjusted for sure, Rome 2 is the sort of most modern, even though it's a while back now, of the original style historical Total War games. Even though we, like I said, probably consider it a more modern game than obviously definitely Shogun 2 or, Medieval and Empire and the like. But Rome 2 still maintains that kind of essence of Total War, at least compared to what Warhammer is and in some ways what Pharaoh is. And at its time, at least with updates and everything, back in 2013-14, Rome looked amazing. Rome was massive. And if you play Rome 2 today, which a bunch of people do, especially with mods and reshades and whatnot, Rome 2 can still look absolutely amazing. And I think that speaks to all of the money that went into producing this game. It is such a big game, such a massive investment, that it still boggles my mind how Creative Assembly actually managed to make this game in 2013. You could absolutely argue that they should have been able to make it better. I mean, in terms of gameplay aspects and whatnot, Rome 2 was so-so or even a disappointment. But that's not to say that it isn't now a wonderful game and that no other company has actually managed to compete with Rome 2. And remember, 12 years, a bunch of time has passed, and we have gotten a lot of other Rome style games in the, let's say, the city builder genre or RTS perhaps, but nothing in this genre. Nothing has tried to compete with what Total War is, and not with what Total War Rome 2 is. There is no alternative. There is no competition. And you could say, obviously that's a bad thing. We do want competition. On the other hand, we need to sort of acknowledge the amount of investment and expertise that went into Rome 2. The systems and expertise that actually only Creative Assembly still sits on to this day. Now, it's very easy to argue that that's kind of a tragedy, I suppose, because we do want competition, we do want other companies making Total War style games that manage to combine the campaign and the battles, and perhaps at a more consumer-friendly level. Because Sega, Creative Assembly, we've obviously experienced some, missteps there. But I mean, look at how beautiful this map looks. Now, I am using a mod here. It's a mod that actually reverts the terrain back to the way it looked at launch, which I think looked better than the current ones. And I am using a reshade. But reshade does add some, color. It's basically just like a contrasting issue. And for the water mod I'm using, it's just like a color mod as well, super easy. My point is, everything that you're looking at here was basically possible in the engine back 12 years ago. What Creative Assembly managed to do with Rome 2 still manages to be more than what any other company manages to do at this stage, at least, with a similar strategy offering. There is no comparison here, really. So while I wanted to touch a bit upon Apollo's video topic, which is the pricing, and I think it's good to have, consumer-friendly approaches, I think Apollo touches upon something good here. We do want a lowering of the price. It is kind of weird that a game that's more than a decade old now still retains a $60 price, but I do kind of think it's worth it though, I do kind of think it's valid, and at least for the complete package, which is at a 50% discount, like at all times, you're getting such massive value for that package, honestly. Obviously, depending on if you like Rome 2 or not. And that topic kind of made me think of Rome 2 in a more holistic sense. Rome 2 is perhaps the only Total War game that's still sort of relevant and, like in a larger sense. We have still mods being created for Rome Remastered. People are actually still making mods for Medieval 2, Empire. All of the Total War games that are, post-Medieval 2, I guess, have a modding scene and still have a few thousand players playing them. But none are as active, at least among the historical games, as Rome 2. Perhaps Attila. But on any given day, Rome 2 probably has twice the amount of players, despite being an older title. That's kind of strange. Or at least it would be if it weren't for what Rome 2 actually is and symbolizes. And I think that's kind of going at the crux of it, because Rome 2 was always Creative Assembly's biggest investment, at least before the Warhammer series. Rome 2 offers not just this massive grand campaign with more factions than ever before, more units than ever before, and so on, but it has a bunch of other campaign packs, thousands of hours worth of content here. And I think the fact that Rome 2, with its modernized controls, its updated visuals, its modding diversity, despite sort of, tacking on to the Empire type of restricted modding that Medieval 2 and Rome 1 did not have, people have found so much possibility in movement here. There are so many mods out there, so many variations of what Rome 2 is to people. The fact that Rome 2 offers a multiplayer campaign, a multiplayer scene that people like Apollo still manages to make awesome content on in terms of the battles. Rome 2 is not just a game, it's the time period as well. It's going back to the roots historically. It is going back to one of the most beloved time periods in history for a lot of people. And a bunch of these things, a dedication to history, a dedication to what people actually loved about the Total War series to begin with, which namely is those time periods that kind of are the mainliners, like the Japanese, the samurai, the Romans, the medieval, blah blah blah. Rome 2 was in that line of games. And sadly, Creative Assembly never continued that line. We never got a Medieval 3 next. We never got that new colonial era game. And I think because what we got afterwards was basically the Warhammer franchise and a few historical spin-offs, which you may or may not like, they never felt like this big next step in history. They never felt like this big, massive investment in what we felt Total War could be. They never felt like they took their core audience, and now that might have shifted to the fantasy audience, of course, but they kind of never felt like they took the core traditional audience as seriously anymore. As we've talked in length on this channel, I think Attila is an amazing game, but it had massive technical issues, and of course it was sort of a semi-sequel to Rome 2, so it was the same time period-ish, almost same subject matter. It was definitely not a medieval game, although, they kind of teased it with that Age of Charlemagne expansion, so we got so close. And then with the Thrones of Britannia game, we got even further, but we never made it to Medieval 3. And I think that's partly why Rome 2 still lives. And I think Rome 2 will never die as a game. I think Rome 2 will never lose that sort of appeal to historical gamers, even though they might not love Rome 2 until that next thing comes along. And at this point, it's been 12 years since Rome 2. And people are still loving the vanilla campaign, or, playing it at least. People like myself probably swear more to the DEI campaigns, the Divide et Impera campaigns, which add a bunch of mechanics that, you kind of want from a Total War game, or at least, that would be nice to see in a Rome 3. It's been 12 years, and that means that in a sort of, for a regular company, for another strategy series, that means that we actually should have maybe seen a Rome 3 by now. I'm definitely one of those people that want a Medieval 3, but at this point, I still love the Roman period so much. There is no sort of reason in my mind why the next game shouldn't be a Rome 3. That's sort of the ridiculousness here, because at this point, we've also had just 2 medievals. What do we want more? I guess it's up to what CA thinks can sell more. I want to show you something here, because granted, it is Rome 2 modded, but it is modded with higher textures, some lighting changes, a reshade or whatnot, but it's still Rome 2 though, it's not some other massive application or anything. Everything that is here kind of is Rome 2 still. And even 12 years after, there is really nothing quite like this, either in the Total War space or in the strategy space as a whole. Now, we can talk about why that is, it is maybe people aren't interested, maybe they don't think that they will get, manage to really take on Creative Assembly and whatnot, but it's still a fact. It's still a fact that this forest, everything you see here, looks freaking tasty. In some ways, the Warhammer series might look a bit more, softer. They might run a little better. Pharaoh as well might have more, dynamic weather effects or whatnot. But the essence of this game, the essence of Rome 2, is that it was such a leap. It still manages to feel modern, somehow, despite the blemishes. This still looks like it could have been made today. And I think for that $60 price tag, I think that's kind of relevant. But more importantly, even if the price was halved or, constantly on sale or whatever the heck, I can't be the only one that still feels like somehow Rome 2 remains relevant and still almost feels like it came out yesterday because of how great it looks still, and because of, like the modern controls, the vibrant modding scene, the gorgeous, animations. There's so much about this game that I'm still sort of baffled, just the fact that it is the way it is. So what I'm actually trying to say here, I realize I'm kind of rambling, but I think my point is that despite there having been made no other true successor to Rome 2, despite there being no Medieval 3 to sort of take over that mantle to say that, hey, I am the actual next historical strategy game, Rome 2 kind of still feels like it. Rome 2 kind of still earns that spot as the modern historical Total War. And that sounds sick. But you know how Skyrim kind of is that still for the Elder Scrolls, which also is sick, and that's partly because it had like 100 re-releases and stuff. Rome 2 still is kind of just Rome 2. And I think we absolutely can thank the modders for keeping it updated and as, varied and as exciting as it does feel. But we can definitely thank Creative Assembly as well for the amount of just pure investment that made into making this game look and feel as much of a leap as it did, warts and all. And there are a lot of warts, don't get me wrong. And despite all of this, despite all of these words of affirmations for Rome 2, I want it to be over too. I want it to die. It's been a long time with Rome 2. It's been 12 years. Rome 2 was here before I got my master's degree. Rome 2 was here before I got my bachelor's degree. Rome 2 was here the year after I quit high school. And yet, there is no Rome 3. And yet, there is no Medieval 3. And yet, Creative Assembly has never managed to reproduce that dedicated feeling to history as they, despite all the missteps, managed to do back here. Now, I've stated multiple times that I feel like, Total War Pharaoh Dynasties is actually a really good game. It's one of those games that feel like Creative Assembly of old in many ways, despite, using the more modern Warhammer style engine, I suppose. But in terms of the historical packaging and some of the mechanics, and also the marketing, the size, the scope, the time period, importantly, it is no Total War Rome. It is no Total War Medieval. It is no Total War Empire. It is this Bronze Age thing that didn't even launch the way it should have done. And that's why I think Rome 2 is still relevant, because it was that. It was all of that. It did make that massive amount of hype. It did visibly and publicly, and in so many words, cater to that core audience that had yet to be split in two. And that's no hate to fantasy fans at all. In fact, I can be a bit of a fantasy fan myself at times. But Rome 2 still has that power, it still has that appeal. And I think that's also why Apollo made his video, because he sees that there is so much love for Rome 2 out there. People still are interested in this time period. And I think if you look at other games too, like from other franchises, like, Manor Lords or Age of Empires, whatever, history is something people love to play. History is that subject matter that people actually find interesting. And if you do make a game that promises massive investment, that promises player-friendly mechanics, consumer-friendly options, and, gameplay styles and offerings and everything, if you do promise some vision that hasn't been there in the past, that you now show more of a community-centered approach to things, I think that makes such a difference. And the fact that we haven't heard much from Creative Assembly in terms of new games, all we've kind of seen are leaks in terms of, are we getting a 40K? Are we getting a World War I or Star Wars or even Medieval 3 down the line? I don't know. I think very few people actually know. But if they are making a Medieval 3, if we are getting a Medieval 2 remastered or whatever, you should say it now, Creative Assembly. You should tell your fans now what's going on, because we are still here. We love Total War games. but so many people feel disillusioned. Now, I want to give you an example of a good approach to this stuff, okay? There is another strategy company that might begin to rival Creative Assembly, and that is Paradox. We all know this. Cliche, I've talked about it myself multiple times. Paradox made a Rome-centered game a few years ago, Imperator Rome, which, much like Rome 2, had a bad launch. Paradox went back to Imperator, much like Creative Assembly, and fixed Imperator Rome. They fixed it so much that it became a genuinely great game. However, they stopped developing it after a while because the players didn't come back, yada yada yada. Sadly, it kind of was left there. Paradox is now making a new Europa Universalis game by all accounts, Project Caesar. What Paradox is doing now, mind you, this game is not yet even announced officially, and yet Paradox is talking about this game, doing dev diaries, answering questions as if it has been announced. They are taking player feedback. They are letting people know that this game is being developed. They are talking specifically about mechanics, what might change, what might not, taking in feedback to, talk about what players might want to see and what ought to be changed. They're showing screenshots of maps and menus and so many things. And the players love it. The players love knowing what's coming up, and the strategy is different from what, say, Bethesda has done with Elder Scrolls 6. They didn't just show a Project Caesar announcement teaser, they showed that and have followed up with dozens and dozens and dozens of dev diaries and dev comments. And I think that, Creative Assembly, it's you and me now, if you are developing Medieval 3, if you are developing Rome 3, if you are developing Medieval 2 Remastered, Empire Remastered, whatever it is, you have so many fans that love history. You have so many fans that probably sit on the fence right now that are playing other games that would love to come back if you just said something. If you just invited us to look at what's being made and sort of allow us to interact with your project. And that does not mean that you let us change what's going on or that you have to listen to feedback, but it means that we feel like there's an engagement there, like you take us seriously, like you respect your fans, like your fans want to see good things from you. Rome 2's popularity, Medieval 2's continued popularity, shows that there is an appetite for this stuff. Manor Lord's massive sales and popularity shows that people want the realism, want the history, want that ambition that we haven't seen in historical-centered Total War games for probably 12 years. And that's not a knock to CA Sofia or any of these other titles. Again, I think CA Sofia does amazing work with what they have been giving and the time and the budget and everything. But with a full mainline game, I believe we could do so much more. And if you just told your community about it, if there is anything, I think people have a lot of leniency. I think people have a lot of love. And I think people have such an interest in this game series and this franchise and Total War in general, that we want to see you being as interested as us. And I think this is also why Apollo is making his video, because he knows there are people out there that might not have bought Rome 2 yet, that might will if it's lower than a $60 regular price. He can see the numbers, like me too. Rome 2 is popular still. But why don't you want to capitalize on that? Make another historical Total War game. And if you are, let us know about it. Let us take part. Let us discuss each dev diary. That creates hype. The longer you talk to us about your deving the game, all the more data you get on what people want as you're making it. Makes it easier to know what's gonna come out in the final game and what we might expect and what we can look forward to. And so I think, even though I personally think that Rome 2's pricing is actually fair in terms of the content that you're getting here, it is a massive game, and with mods and everything, it is so much more. I think ultimately it shows what Creative Assembly can do with a Total War game when it is their sole focus, and when it is exactly what the audience wants. So I want to thank Apollo for making his pricing video. It's always good to be pro-consumer, no matter the quality or, quantitative aspects of the game. or its relevance. And I want to ask you, the community, what you think of Rome 2 today, its relevance, its ambition, and if you think it's a good idea for Creative Assembly to, open up its community base a little, open up its feedback base with more dev diaries, and perhaps let us know at an earlier stage what they're actually working on, not when they have some fancy CGI trailer going, because I don't know if it's just me, but CGI trailers mean nothing. A photo or a screenshot of a in-game menu means a lot more to me, because you know what? That's real. I can talk about that and imagine what's in the game and say if I like it or not. With a CGI trailer, I can't. Let me know your thoughts on the video and this format in the comments. Yeah, I'll see you next time. Cheers.